to, okay, there we go. I think we're recording now. Just wanted to elevate Commissioner Anthony and share the mutual interest in capital efficiency mechanisms. So yeah, I think you all will enjoy that as you get into November. Happy to and privileged to be able to speak to you all today just on the concept of modernization of regulatory frameworks for the future of gas, and starting with a bit of a broader lens across this discussion, but really starting to hone in on how the PBR elements that I'm sure you all have been examining, perhaps primarily in the electric utility index context, can be applied in the gas sector as well, in particular in the times of ambiguity, complexity, and uncertainty that we're experiencing during energy transition. So with that, well, maybe I'll just give a quick snapshot of myself. As Commissioner Anthony already spoke to, head of a consulting team at Strategen. We support a number of commissions, consumer advocates, and others in the regulatory space, strong focus on regulatory innovation. Prior to joining Strategen, I spent a number of years as Commission Counsel at the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission, where, among other things, I was able to support and help lead the first phase of Hawaii's approach to performance-based regulation for the electric utilities there. So just jumping right in, I just wanted to start by, kind of doing a bit of context setting for, I think where we find ourselves as an industry when it comes to, natural gas distribution utilities. I characterize this moment, this sort of inflection point in time as, as a wicked regulatory environment. So natural gas utilities and the commissions that regulate them are operating in a really uncertain time at this point. And we use this term in academia and in other business contexts, use this term tuna to kind of describe the characteristics of what a wicked problem looks like. And I'm suggesting that many of these characteristics are in place today. And I think it's apt to describe, what we're experiencing at this point in time as indeed a wicked regulatory environment here. So the four characteristics are turbulence. The pace of change in the markets and the regulatory environment is rapid, and it's increasingly uncertain and unstable. Uncertainty here, the future is unpredictable when it comes to gas transition, the future of gas, and that can make it really hard to make informed decisions and evidence-based decisions. Novelty, right? So there's new technologies and business models that are emerging, within the gas space, be they RNG or hydrogen or electrification and network geothermal, and these new technologies and business models are disrupting the traditional mode of operations. And finally, of course, ambiguity, right? So the data is not clear here. It's sort of hard to see patterns, rules, or trends, drawing upon historic experience to be able to make reasoned, informed, and measured decisions going forward. So let's maybe just step through a couple of examples of, what's unfolding before us at this moment, and just examining this sort of wicked regulatory environment right now. So, after a decade of relatively stable, low prices within the sector, natural gas price volatility is increasing, and in many respects, as reflected in this graph, in many respects, one takeaway from this visual is that the period of stability, in some ways, it was an exception rather than a norm. And so I think it's really apt to ask the question whether fuel price volatility from natural gas is something that is here to stay, and the era of low stable natural gas prices may have been a snapshot in time rather than a new normal. We're also seeing some significant policy changes in the policy landscape, truly evolving fairly quickly across the US. So cities and states are setting ambitious decarbonization goals that are really can be challenging for gas distribution utilities to tackle. As demonstrated here on this map, you see states with economy-wide decarbonization targets, And as indicated by blue and green, you see the blue states are those states where economy-wide decarbonization targets have been set by statute. States in green are reflecting where there's been economy-wide decarbonization targets set through executive action. Those states that are indicated with stars are just reflecting states where future of gas work is in progress. So as you can see, this map was looking far more sparse even just a couple of years ago, and so the dynamics, the policy landscape here is changing very quickly. So turning again to natural gas utilities are also looking at the emerging technology space, right? So natural gas utilities are feeling optimistic that alternative fuels like hydrogen, green hydrogen, and renewable natural gas can help them decarbonize their systems and can help them meet climate goals. On one hand, gas utilities appear bullish on these opportunities, but there is uncertainty as to supply and the technical aspects of making this making such a transition possible. Now, on the other hand, electrification and other heating alternatives such as airspace heat pump water heaters, they're increasingly cost effective, and as many of us know, the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of components to continue to make heating alternatives such as heat pumps increasingly cost effective going forward. And so there's demand for these alternatives from people who want to increase comfort as well as to decrease their personal emissions, and newer breakthroughs in cold weather, heat pumps continue to make them realistic in colder weather climates. So given all this complexity, uncertainty, emerging new technologies, really what's being set forth for regulators, is indeed a wicked regulatory environment. And, I think it's a very uncomfortable and atypical position for a regulator to find him or herself, right? It's in many ways can feel like a fork in the road in some instances when it comes to future of gas and gas transition. So, the analogy I like to describe is that it kind of feels like you're, as a regulator, as a decision maker, kind of driving fast down the road and accelerating towards a bit of a fork here. On the one hand, there's a path towards sort of larger, more capital intensive investments that sort of maintain the historic trend of a growing gas utility and an extensive network of distribution pipes. And on the other path is sort of a completely different gas business model, right? It's in this scenario, the state is looking to incentivize more electrification. The gas utility may be starting to be trimmed in strategic areas as demand for gas drops over time. And these pathways, unlike in other areas of transition, are very hard to reconcile from a public interest perspective. And I think many regulators, particularly in those states that were shaded blue and green in the previous map, are starting to feel a bit of pressure to understand these pathways and understand the choices in front of them. Feeling pressured to sort of make a decision and start to direct a gas utilities sort of which way to go. And the magnitude of impact of these decisions is very serious, right? This is the types of decision making that is not traditionally put in front of commissions of this sort. And I think what I want to start to call out here is that the first step here, to my mind, is to start slowing down the car as it's traveling down the road. And I think what it's worth pointing out and recognizing is that as the car is accelerating, the current framework and the current incentive structures that we have with respect to regulatory frameworks governing our gas distribution utilities is already sort of steering the car towards a particular path already. And that is one that's preferring capital intensive build out and a continued expansion of the gas distribution system. And so every jurisdiction may find different pathways forward when it comes to decarbonization, but it's, in my view, important for us to be able to sort of slow down the car's travel as we're approaching this fork, to make sure that decisions of this nature that will have, especially when we're talking about investments in, long life infrastructure, 20, 30 plus years, is being made in a manner that's well thought out, well reasoned, well planned for, and reduces risks that may harm customers and in protection of the public interest. So my message today, in part, is that look, no one needs to be making a specific decision on a particular path today, right? No one needs to be choosing the path or have a crystal ball as to what the sort of future of gas looks like today. However, let us recognize, though, that there are some regulatory structures and mechanisms in place that do prefer and sort of steer gas utilities down a more capital intensive path today. And the regulatory framework is not really set up to be indifferent to these two potential pathway outcomes. So, what I want to step through is the fact that, there's a real opportunity for regulators to begin to seek and create an environment that moves gas utilities away from this status quo regulatory construct. That the existing traditional regulatory structures align gas utility financial incentives with continued gas system expansion. And given the uncertainty that I've outlined here, the risk of stranded or underutilized assets, is real and perhaps growing in some jurisdictions. And so regulators should be able to look to preserve optionality going forward in order to protect that public interest. And so to that end, let's start to look at new regulatory tools, data, and approaches to better inform decision-making during a time of transition and to ensure that customers are protected in the long run. So fundamentally, right, an updated regulatory framework, is appropriate and should be examined to better align gas utility financial incentives with a far more complex set of system outcomes, and quite frankly, a very different sort of set of circumstances and facts than gas distribution utilities have been operating, in the decades past. These new outcomes include decarbonization, safety, resilience, pipeline leaks, and things of that nature. So commissions can and frankly, should begin tackling this issue through a phased approach, right? So principles of gradualism, still apply. Identifying opportunities to sort of first address the current landscape today, before moving towards opportunities to evolve regulatory approaches in the near to medium term, and then looking to align core structural incentives as more of a steady state approach within the longer term. And this longer term and these more structural incentives, this is where we can get into more specific PBR elements as applied to the gas sector. So in terms of ways in which regulators can begin addressing the current landscape today, there's several examples now of jurisdictions where they're beginning to take a hard look at, say, gas line extension policies, where certain jurisdictions are looking to either reduce or remove current line extension allowances, which have a net effect of really subsidizing continued gas system expansion. This is one of the ways to sort of start to slow down the car as it's traveling down the road towards this fork. And in addition to line extension policy examination, the use of accelerated depreciation, for new gas system infrastructure assets can be a valuable tool that can help better align asset recovery with actual asset utilization. We'll take a little bit of a closer look at accelerated depreciation in the gas sector context. So, with respect to gas accelerated depreciation, it can be helpful on a number of fronts, right? It can help to limit the potential magnitude and duration of a future stranded asset value if that's into the future, if gas sales are declining in a particular jurisdiction, out 10, 20 years. It can also help to address the intergenerational equity questions. If current ratepayers are expected to really use the gas system infrastructure much more intensely today than future ratepayers are expected to utilize that same infrastructure into the future. There's a real argument from an intergenerational equity perspective that's reflected in depreciation schedules as well. And finally, accelerated depreciation can have the benefit of sort of still helping to support the gas utility's financial integrity during a time of transition, but also help to enable an ability to invest and deploy necessary and prudent resources from that utility's perspective. Within this evolve approaches, this more near to medium term category, there's a number of different policy and regulatory elements we can take a look at. I mean, here's where I like to talk about beginning to bring forward the concept of performance metrics and benchmarking, concepts that we talk a lot about in the electric utility sector, and starting to bring those forward in a real and discrete way for gas distribution utilities as well, right? So starting to track key indicators to understand gas utility performance. This can include things like, gas leakage, safety. I mean, these are things that I think are going to be increasingly important as we transition, and understanding the fact that many of these safety, leakage, and pipeline issues tend to be a little bit more on the OpEx side of the equation, right? And so this will get more to the long-term approach as we start to talk about capital preference as opposed to operating expense, and how we may want to seek to balance that moving forward, particularly in a time of transition for the gas distribution system. Flagging revenue decoupling here again. The analogy to the electric sector here is strong. If we're thinking about the potential for flat or declining natural gas sales into the future, thinking about ways in which we're decoupling and delinking gas sale preference, right, from revenue recognition for gas utilities. How are we encouraging efficiency and maybe other opportunities for decarbonization that are not tied to the throughput incentive here. I think pipeline replacement plans is one that I really want to flag too. I mean, there's a lot of investment that flows through rate cases and onto customer bills just through pipeline replacement plans. And I know there are some demonstration projects and pilots happening in the Northeast where as pipeline replacement plans come up, as more planning is brought to bear on the natural gas system, there's a real opportunity to take a look at potential alternatives to just like for like infrastructure replacement. There's exploration on a pilot basis in the Northeast around looking at networked geothermal and other heating alternatives in lieu of pipeline replacement. So there's a real opportunity to take a look at that more holistically, but also when we talk about cost recovery for pipeline replacement plans, that we're maybe bringing that much more discreetly into base rates. And we're looking at, really getting our arms around the costs that are associated with pipeline replacement plans, rather than allowing them to be that cost recovery to flow through riders without as much oversight or ability to interrogate. And in some jurisdictions, that's how a lot of these pipeline replacement plans have their cost recovered is through riders. Non-pipe alternatives or NPAs, again, drawing upon analogies from the electric sector. I mean, this is the gas sector equivalent of a non-wires alternative. I'll speak a moment on the next slide just on a mini case study example of where Con Ed has been exploring non-pipe alternatives. But this is another opportunity to look at developing pilots and programs to sort of gain experience with alternatives to traditional infrastructure build out and development. And so with that, I'll move to that next slide. So here's a little bit of an example citing Con Edison. The challenge here in this particular case was increasing, unlike what we may be seeing into the future, as I described with the future of gas and the potential for flat or declining, gas sales. In New York City, they're actually experiencing increasing demand, but building pipeline capacity is very challenging, as one might imagine within the New York City construct. So the solution here that was proposed was kind of developed about a $305 million package that included both demand and supply side solutions. The New York PSC approved about $226 million of efficiency and electrification coming out of that proposed package. The net result of this little case study and pilot example is that the portfolio itself did not wholly obviate the need for a new pipeline, but the coefficient nonetheless has continued to encourage Con Edison to begin developing non-pipe alternatives into the future. And as a result, Con Edison has issued RFPs for 3 NPA projects going forward. And this is just an opportunity to begin to experiment with new approaches and create a bit of space for, testing new ideas and creating space for innovation within this space. And then finally, I really wanted to spend a bit of time to talk about, the longer term. And this is where I characterize it sort of aligning structural incentives. And I think at the core of this, right, is a couple of key pieces. It really centers on cost containment, and it really centers in on how are we aligning the financial incentives for a gas distribution utility to really facilitate and enable transition, which in some jurisdictions could be, relatively significant. The current financial structures in place for gas distribution utilities, just to say it bluntly, really prefer and reward the deployment of capital with infrastructure, and therefore lead us to an ever increasing and expanding gas system. That is the financial signals that are being sent to our gas distribution utilities. That is, for those gas distribution utilities that are, investor owned and publicly traded, that is what their shareholders are looking to them to do in order to help deliver shareholder value. And that may be increasingly in conflict with state and city level policy, and even just customer technology adoption trends, if we do move into a direction that's much higher electrification and lower demand for natural gas sales overall. So, just taking a specific look at, okay, we've seen, similar concerns be expressed in the electric sector as well. We know that, states within the electric sector sphere have taken a really holistic and comprehensive view of advanced performance-based regulation to begin to address issues of cost containment and issues of capital bias, and also looking at performance metrics and performance incentive mechanisms to really help to steer and evolve our electric utilities as they go through transition. And these same core tenets apply to the gas sector and gas utilities as well. And in some circumstances, the need for this shift in regulatory approach may be even more acute, as what we're talking about in the gas sector is, it won't always be just a change in the potential supply of gas in all jurisdictions. It may be a more significant and material evolution of the gas system than what we're really experiencing in the electric sector. So here I point out the example of the Alberta Utilities Commission, our neighbors to the north in Canada. And Alberta has been using performance-based regulation to encourage both gas and electric distribution companies to find efficiencies and reduce costs while continuing to deliver safe and reliable utility service. So the main mechanism by which they're doing this is through revenue-capped multi-year rate plans that help to keep distribution gas utility rates lower for customers than they would have been using traditional cost of service approaches in this space. And so during a PBR term, which as reflected here in Alberta, it tends to be about a 5-year performance-based regulation multi-year rate plan term. And that means that the revenue is capped over the life of that term plan, and the target revenues are allowed to escalate pursuant to a formula that's tied to, an external index such as inflation, less a productivity factor. So this sort of I minus X in revenue cap approach to multi-rate plans. and during a PBR term, distribution gas utilities that are successful in reducing operational costs, increasing operational efficiencies, finding ways to continue to maintain exceptional service and safety and all the other goals that are set out for that utility, but doing it while maintaining cost control and lowering costs for customers, they're enabled an opportunity to actually realize a higher rate of return as a result of their ability to operate cost effectively and efficiently. And customer distribution rates are updated annually under this process to incorporate an inflation factor, as I mentioned, and they're reset again every 5 years to reflect cost savings that are achieved over the past multi-rate plan period cycle. So finally, I just wanted to highlight one other example of where some innovation has been brought to the gas sector space. Again, looking to the north to Canada, but to a different province. Here I'm not sure if folks are familiar with this mini case study, but referring to kind of Hydro-Quebec and Quebec's dual energy agreement. So in this particular example, the gas and electric utilities came together and really had an agreement to share energy supply roles. There's a state policy, provincial policy in place there to reduce GHG emissions, by 50% by 2030. So that was one of the catalyzing factors for this shared energy supply agreement. There's also government incentives for electric heat pumps to increase electrification in the pursuit of these goals. And what this agreement ostensibly enabled was the installation of electric heat pumps in a broad way, really reducing the amount of natural gas sales and usage by about 70% in those buildings that install them. But these are not the more up-to-date sort of cold weather heat pumps. And obviously, it being Canada, there are periods of time where those heat pumps are going to need to kick into higher gear in a less efficient manner and really ramp what that would have effectuate in really cold periods of time, sort of in peaky periods of time, would be a real spike in the needs of the electricity system. And this would in turn require a lot of infrastructure upgrades on the grid side, it's more expensive upgrades on the grid side. So what this does was allows for a reduction in natural gas usage by about 70% of the buildings that use them. And then on those most peaky days or the coldest days, the natural gas supply is still there to kick on when heat pumps are less efficient. So there's acknowledgement here that the gas utility revenue will shrink as a result of this, but the gas utility itself was willing to embark on this agreement because it understood that sort of the writing was on the wall here, and this allows for some electric utility payment to the gas utility almost as a demand response product and is providing peak value in the avoidance of a lot of distribution system upgrades in the near term to accommodate that really peaky load on the coldest days of the year. So with that, I know that was a lot of material to kind of run through, but I wanted to just take a pause and maybe turn it back to you, Commissioner Anthony, to maybe facilitate some questions and discussions here as well. So
thank you
so much. Yeah.
No,